Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, manager wants me to identify people every time I encounter someone at alarm. Sure thing. Nope, still didn't scan. Boss agrees with secretary that I am not the office manager, so I stop managing the office. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Manager wants me to identify people every time I encounter someone at alarm. Sure thing. So a little story from years ago about an assistant manager that doesn't understand the work at all. Mandatory English isn't my first language, note, smiley face. I worked as a security guard driving around industrial areas and responding to alarms that go off at the buildings from our clients. When I started there I was told/learn to ask for proper ID, driving license, passport, ID card, if I encounter someone in the building, which was very common as most alarms came from people not turning off the alarm in time/entering the wrong code, and note their details in the report. But, and this will be important later on, if they can't show ID, kindly request them to leave and close the building. If they refuse, call police to deal with it. Some background to make things clear, ER laws here make it so that security guards are just civilians. Which means I can ask for ID, but if they refuse to give it there is nothing I can do. Only law enforcement officers can demand IDs. Also, my assistant manager hates me for some reason, always looking for something to pin on me. So for a few years I do this as I was learned, ask for ID if I found someone in the building, and ask them to leave if they refused or didn't have one with them. Some would show credit cards or other things with their name on it, then I would write it in my report, but still ask them to leave. All this time the assistant manager would go over these reports in the morning. But I never heard any complaint about it. So I was doing stuff right, I thought. After a few years on this particular day I get an alarm, so I drove there. I arrive at the building, go in and find the cleaning lady doing her job. The alarm system logs show she entered the wrong code the first time, and was just a little too late entering it correct the second time. As would happen a lot. I kindly ask her for an ID and she tells me she doesn't have any with her. She show me a bank card with her name. I write down the name in the report, including it was from a bank card, and tell her she has to leave. She understands, pick up her stuff and leaves. I finish my report and go on my merry way. The next morning I receive an email from my assistant manager, going mental over the fact I send the cleaning lady away without nothing down proper ID details. And telling me the client is mad because they wanted to know who was in the building. I calmly reply that I did what I always did and was instructed to do when I joined the company. And had been doing without any issue for the last 3 or 4 years. The reply came fast with detailed instructions. If someone doesn't have proper ID on them, you call the police and have them identify the person so you can note it in your report. The assistant manager also made a memo stating this to everyone in the unit. Which I of course also made a copy of. As the good employee that I am, I followed that instruction to the letter. Most others didn't, as they weren't targeted by the assistant manager. So they could do whatever they wanted. I called the police every time a person couldn't show me proper ID. Which happened almost every shift I worked, if not multiple times in a single shift. Leading to a few employees of clients actually being arrested for failing to identify to a law enforcement officer. This wasn't my intention at all. Some police officers were jerks and just arrested them even though they could verify the identity of someone fairly simple on location. The police calling my manager why the hell they were called every single day to go and confirm someone's name, because they didn't have ID on them. Multiple clients calling the manager why a simple alarm was taking 3 times longer than usual. Clients have to pay per 15 minutes I am on site after the initial 15 minutes have passed, and refusing to pay the extra fee for me waiting for the police to show up. As I expected, I got invited for a talk with my manager and assistant manager to discuss some things. Basically my manager wanted to chew me out over all these calls he had been getting. Let alone people being arrested. The next day I sit down with my manager and the assistant manager, being very cheerful as his favorite target was getting a huge reprimand. The manager asks me why I called to police every time someone doesn't have a proper ID, asking me if I have any idea how pissed off the police is, and how many clients are refusing to pay the fee because it takes so much longer now I have to wait for the police. Basically, I costed the company a lot of money. After the manager has asked these questions, I pull out my folder containing the email conversation with the assistant manager, instructing me to do exactly that. And the copy of the, now conveniently disappeared from the office, memo with the same instructions. Both signed by assistant manager. The same assistant manager that is now turning pale realizing what I'm about to hand over to the manager. I calmly explain the manager while he is reading both papers, that I am only following the instructions given to me, as I had clearly been doing it wrong for the last 3 to 4 years prior to this incident. The face of the manager is slowly turning red from anger, while the assistant manager is turning paler by the second. Before the manager explodes, he asks me to go grab a coffee and wait till he calls me back in. They needed to go over these papers and decide what they would do with me. Sure thing, boss. While I'm enjoying my coffee, I can hear my manager go mental to his assistant. Multiple things like "how can you be so stupid," and "they have it on percent $dollar at paper, you idiot," are clearly heard across the entire floor. When I get called back in, I can see my assistant manager sitting silently, shamefully behind his computer, attempting to avoid any and all eye contact with me. The manager calmly explains he wasn't aware of these papers, and that I should follow the instructions as all other employees should, saving face, as admitting this was wrong and changing the instructions would mean defeat of the management. And that he would inform all clients about this, so they can avoid these kind of incidents. I spend the next 9 years following these instructions, which angered the assistant manager as he would read my reports every morning, telling about how the police had to show up again and again for something silly. Eventually they found a way to get rid of me, reassigning me to a new position, which I gladly accepted as the work was a lot more fun. I actually became a law enforcement officer with that switch. The pay was better and the hours were even sweeter. Nope, still didn't scan. Texas has this strange idea that providing you a driver's license the day you go to the DMV is risky. As such, they give you a piece of paper printed out in black and white and mail you the actual license at a later date. This is a bit strange as it creates a period where people carry a valid legal document that looks like a 5th grader pasted a headshot into MS Paint. This created an awkward dynamic when I worked at a gas station. What do people go to gas stations for? After gas, the most common things are lottery, beer, and smokes. All of these are age restricted and have rather intense laws surrounding unlawful sales. To help avoid the nasty fines etc. associated with these, my gas station had a pair of rules. For anyone you're not 100% sure is over 30, ask if they're over 30 and card them if you're not convinced they're older than 30 after said answer. Yes, the question was stupid. But whatever. Scan all IDs to ensure they're legitimate documents and not fakes. At their face, these sound reasonable. Though, the second caused an odd situation where fancier states had 3D barcodes instead of magnetic strips, meaning I couldn't sell. And this story is obviously heading towards the paper the DMV gives people. Here's one such story. It's a small rush, 3 to 4 people in line, and a younger guy comes in to buy beer. I'm honestly not sure if he's 21, so he's clearly not 30. I ask the nonsensical question because really, I can be fired if I just card him without asking the question. He tells me he's not older than 30. I ask for his ID and he fumbles to pull out the dreaded paper ID. Now, the combination of Texas and my employer have put everyone into a frustrating situation. In addition to Texas using these silly paper IDs, state law also requires you to get an acceptable ID before making any sale once you've asked for ID. In other words, you can't ask for ID and then determine you believe they're old enough. If you doubt it enough to ask, you're liable for any sale. I see the ID and immediately feel bad. I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to take that ID. I recommend trying the gas station down the street that has different ownership and potentially more consumer-friendly rules. He provided the common response to ask why I can't take it. I explained to him the corporate policy requires I scan the magnetic strip of all IDs to verify their authenticity, and they've explicitly decided against waiving that for the paper IDs. He instantly gets furious and tells me to scan the ID. This one caught me off a bit and I asked him, "Are you serious?" To which he told me yes, now scan my damn ID. Befuddled, I take the folded up piece of paper and slide it through the magnetic strip reader. "Sorry sir, it didn't scan." This started a chain of events where each thing seemed more unrealistic. His response was, "You didn't even try." I asked if he'd like me to try harder to scan the ID, and he said he did. I looked at him confused and tried several different ways to slide this folded up piece of paper, unfolded piece of paper, slowly slide, quickly slide, used multiple scanners, etc. to get it to scan. Nope, still didn't scan. I hand it back to him, and he's over the top at this point. It's also worth noting the line behind him is now about 10 people strong, including a few regulars watching in amazement as I'm remaining calm. He starts cussing me out and demands a contact for my manager. I pull out our paperwork and provide him a number for our corporate office. No, stupid, I want your manager, not your corporate office. Okay? I gave you my manager's manager. I gladly handed him the store's number, which would come to me, and shared the hours my manager typically worked so he'd be free to try to call. After he left, I made a point to apologize to each person in line for the extra wait while each also expressed surprise I hadn't snapped at dude. Needless to say, he never made that call to my manager. Though, I don't know if he ever found his beer. Boss agrees with secretary that I am not the office manager, so I stopped managing the office. When I was doing my articles at a small law firm internship to be admitted as an attorney, I was the go-to person for everything at the office, setting up computers, buying stationery, paying bills, going to court, seeing clients, etc. After being admitted as an attorney, I continued doing all this because the secretary only did about 20% of what a secretary would usually do and refused to do anything else. My boss does some shady business, don't pay taxes, etc., so he couldn't just fire her for fear of her ratting him out. He also never disciplined her. We are not in the US. Since we worked from my boss's mother's house, the secretary also spent about 50% of her day just chatting to his mother, and they became fast friends. Guess who was always the evil one that everyone ganged up on? Yours truly. I was made out to be incompetent at my job, and I used to cry a lot and almost became an alcoholic from work stress. One day the secretary got really upset with me, after I asked her to buy stationery since we didn't even have staples, and after a heated argument told me that I'm not the office manager and should stop lording it about as if I was. Bear in mind I was her senior both as an attorney and in number of years worked at the firm. My boss did nothing and rather got upset with me, and so did his mother. I decided there and then I am done doing both secretary work and my attorney work because I was working roughly 50 to 60 hours per week, standard is 40. Trying to get everything done without receiving overpay. The unemployment rate in my country is around 30%, and in the legal field supply of lawyers exceeds demand. She knew this and my boss knew this, but no one cared that I was basically working myself into an early grave. Cue malicious compliance. If everyone agrees that I am not the office manager, then I will stop managing the flow of the office and only do my attorney work. I stopped paying the bills, buying the stationery, reminding my boss of important meetings, etc. Within 2 weeks the electricity was cut off for 10 days, because it wasn't paid, and my boss' elderly mother and the rest of his family had no electricity. We could also not work for those 10 days. Once the electricity went on, the phone lines were cut because of non-payment. We could again not work. The post piled up, there were no stationery. We couldn't do service of court documents because our service providers cut us off. It went on for weeks. I simply worked around the issues and sorted my life out. One example, when the Wi-Fi was off I used my cell phone to hotspot my laptop without telling anyone. In the end my boss and his mother begged me to do what I used to do, but I refused. Since I was focusing more on my actual work my fees increased, and my pay increased as well. Shortly thereafter I moved away from that office to our secondary office, and worked alongside lovely colleagues who all did what they got paid to do. I have been at this new office, same firm just a different location, for the last 2 years. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.